Hey, I know I've been gone for a really long time. That's because I had set out a goal to make the ultimate Leo guide too. At the viewer's request, I really wanted to make it ultimate because this is the very first video I made on Leo that kickstarted my channel. And it's strange to believe that was over a year ago. So I really wanted to be special. Now, that being said, I've never did anything this long and tedious editing wise. So I didn't realize how long this would actually take me, but I got it done after 5 weeks. I finally finished it. And let me tell you, this was not good for my ADD. For those who don't know what it is, ADD is attention deficit disorder. And I know my case is not as severe as most people's that have ADD, but oh my God, I used to hate the doctor visits. They would ask me really dumb questions like, if you see a ball rolling across the street, does it grab your attention? Anyway, how my ADD works, I'm gonna give you a real life example. And this actually happened during the guide. I would be recording my footage to make the guide and practice. I would have Leo and Kai. And it's time to get the footage. And I would start to practice with Kai. I like the character. He has cool combos. Next thing you know, 2 hours have passed. The sun is setting. And I'm just like, what happened? What happened? It's very funny when I think about it, but I went to go see the new Avatar when it released with my friends, and everybody was like, we're gonna watch it in 3D. I'm like, I never watched a movie in 3D, but fine. I get in there, the movie is starting, I put the glasses on, and it like blows my mind. I then proceed to sit there and rapidly lift and putting my glasses on and off for the next 20 minutes trying to make sense of this. I have the glasses on, I'm closing my right eye, looking at my left eye, trying to process the images, vice versa. And I keep popping on my glasses on and off, and I can only imagine the people around me are like, what the hell is this guy doing? Meanwhile, I'm like, this is amazing. Anyway, before I get into this guide, I've literally put everything I know into this guide. So with that being said, it is really long. So I kind of had to rush past a couple of sections. So feel free to pause so you can read and fully understand everything. And I know you won't be able to watch this whole video in one sitting, so I added chapters. Hope you enjoy. All right, so first we're going to start off talking about neutral. Leo's neutral is pretty fucking interesting because it requires a lot of fucking patience. So first we're going to start off talking about his 5S. His 5S has 12 frames of startup. It's pretty slow compared to other characters' 5Ss, but it makes up for it in range. I mainly use this normal for whiff punishing. Outside that, it's pretty useless in the neutral. It has a high hitbox, so other characters could just easily low profile it. And if you throw this move out in the neutral too much, other players would just start 6P'ing it. So I wouldn't use this move in the neutral too much. And plus, it just loses to a lot of other characters' 5Ss like Ram and May. So yeah, other characters with disjointed hitboxes, it just straight out beat Leo's 5S. So mainly you just want to use it for whiff punishes in certain cases where you want to take your turn back where you don't have enough time to close the gap and use your other normals. All right, so next we got his 5H. His 5H has 15 frames of startup. Unique thing about this move compared to 5S is that it has a lower hitbox. So it could catch players who are actively trying to low profile you or 6P you, but it is a tad bit slower. But in my personal opinion, 5H is a stronger normal than 5S. You get better counter hit reward with 5H. 5H is like the centerpiece to Leo's game plan. You want to use this move to check other players' dashes from full screen to mid screen. A lot of players like to fight Leo around this range due to them having disjointed hitboxes that just beat out Leo's moves and them being afraid of crosscut. So they want to keep their distance, and you want to use this to your advantage because this is where 5H shines. It shines in locking down that mid range. I will be covering more on this button in later chapters. This button is very important into being successful with Leo. The goal of this guide is to keep everything relevant to topic and keep the guide concise so it'd be easier for you to learn. So I don't want to flood you with information and get you sidetracked, and hopefully you could clearly understand how to use each move in specific situations. All right, so next we got his 5K. His 5K has 9 frames to start up. Now this move is slow compared to other characters' 5Ks. I'm gonna sound like a broken record throughout this guide, but a lot of Leo's normals is just slower than other characters' normals, and that's why his neutral requires so much patience, because he actively just gets beat out with faster normals. But with it being slower, it makes up for it in distance. If you combine it with your dash, it can cover some deceptive distance. You want to use this move basically to get through your opponent's offense. You kind of weave between their offensive options. Some players like to mash against Leo, so they'll just throw out their long range normals. You kind of just weave through the offense and take your turn back. All right, okay, so next we got his 5P. His 5P has 5 frames to start up. This is Leo's fastest normal, and in some ways it's better to use this more than 5K. Because it's faster and it's just a good poke to take your turn back. It's -1 on block, and it just has more application than 5K. It has better frame traps and better counter hit options, but both serve its purpose. 5K covers more distance, but 5P is faster. If you closer to your opponent, you want to use 5P. If the character is farther away from you, you want to use 5K. All right, lastly we got his 2K. His 2K has 7 frames to start up, where 5H is good for threatening players who are dashing from that mid-range. 2K is really good for players dashing in that close range area where you don't have enough time to throw out 5H. 2K is definitely the better option because of the speed. This is very effective on characters that like to run up on you, like GL, Chip, Kai. It really trips up players who are trying to like run up and grab you. All right, so we're going to talk about the defensive stance. To me personally, I feel like every time they nerfed something that was good about Leo, they gave him a random defensive stance buff, which to me felt a tad bit lazy at the time. But as time passes playing season 2, I feel myself gravitating towards defensive stance more, and I feel like it's very underutilized. It has so many applications and it covers so many of Leo's weaknesses that I feel people need to be more aware of. Now, I'm about to say some things that are obvious, but we're going to cover everything for the sake of the explanation. First, with the 5H version. Like I said prior, 5H is the centerpiece of Leo's game plan, so it's obvious that we're going to be using the 5H defensive stance version more than the 5S version. Now, you go into defensive stance by holding 5H during the recovery frames. Now, there's a lot of reasons why defensive stance is good, but one in particular is because it protects you if you whiff your 5H. You can whiff your 5H, then you could go into defensive stance and give yourself whiff protection. So let's take a look at this clip where I use 5H, like I said previously, to cover that mid-range area that players like to gravitate around to fight Leo. Sometimes I'm reacting to players dashing into that mid-range, but other times I'm throwing out 5H preemptively. Sometimes I could guess wrong, which it could end up to me whiffing 5H, but because you could go into defensive stance, whether you hit or miss, you're basically diminishing your recovery frames, making it harder to punish your 5H. Not only that, sometimes player would just randomly jump and throw out 5H, and I'll go in defensive stance on whiff, and this allows me to counter players using jump attacks. Another unique thing about the defensive stance, if you throw out 5H on block, then you can use the follow-up attack from the defensive stance to counter players that are trying to mash through the gaps. The gap is so tight. The gap is so tight, if a player tries to use 5P or 2K, it will get snuffed out, and you could get very good damage off the counter hit with the follow-up attack. And I found myself using defensive stance to taunt the player. I will hold the defensive stance to bait them in close, and then I'll let it go. Then I'll check their approach with like a 5H. And sometimes I would just hold the defensive stance, inviting the other player to use their low attacks. And the reason behind this is that the follow-up attack from the defensive stance has a disjointed hitbox, which allows you to beat out a lot of moves. So some characters I could just bait out the low attacks, like Stroke the Big Tree, or Bikin's 2H, or Jacko's 2D, or any character that has to really get close to you. You could just let them get close, and once they enter that close range, you can use the follow-up attack as soon as they get in that range and just let it rip. And it has very low recovery, so if you whiff it, it's not really a big deal. I will be covering more about defensive stance in later chapters. Yeah, because it's a whole lot more I still want to talk about. So in a recent patch 1.24, they finally fixed the problem with Leo's 2D. Before, they had increased the recovery, making it more punishable on block. And by increasing the recovery, they gave you less frames to go in the crosscut, to where your opponent can mash wake up grab before you could throw out a BTK to punish their wake up buttons. But now with 2D, lifting your opponent slightly higher off the ground, it gives you additional frames to set up, maintaining that same recovery so it's still punishable on block. Now you could go for a crosscut after 2K2D and have enough time to go for a BTK without being punished by wake up throw. Although the timing is still pretty tight compared to previous patches, so it can be less than ideal to go for the setup online because the timing is strict and the lag, of course. So you still might be susceptible to wake up throw, and players know that. That's why they still go for wake up throw even after the patch. Another downside to 2K2D, the additional frames you get from lifting your opponent higher off the ground is only effective on light characters. Heavy characters, it seems to have no effect, as heavy characters still could wake up throw before you could squeeze out a BTK. And you can't even backdash. That means if you try to set up on a heavy character, their wake up throw literally beats all options. It beats everything. But although it doesn't quite work the same as it did in previous patches, it's still something that you have in your arsenal. I just don't go for it too often because the risk / reward don't seem to be worth it to me. And I just don't see back turn stance as viable as it used to be, because you actually don't get much off a back turn anymore, and it's way harder to extend pressure because they took away his hard knockdown. You don't get a lot of damage off his back turn. To me, it's not worth it, especially in a game like Guilty Gear where everyone do high damage. It's high risk, low reward for you, where your opponent, it's low risk, high reward. I don't know why they would nerf his 2D, especially when you look at other characters mix-ups like Melia and Eno having way scarier mix, with those characters having safe jumps, 50-50s, overall safe pressure, and Leo has none of that. But another way you can get back turn is to do 2K6K, 5K6K, or /2S into DP. Give you enough time to squeeze out a BTK after going for crosscut, which the timing is a little less strict if you was to do it from 2K2D, but I still don't go for this option because you still have to guess on their wake up, so I don't do it too often either. And then you got 236S, which I like the most. You get great Oki even though it pushes your opponent a bit far away, but you get great positioning, and it's way less committal than going for a back turn stance setup, where you're forced to make a hard read once you get into back turn in most situations. And it puts you in a good position to punish bad habits, at the same time remaining safe, because you don't have to overcommit. You can land 236S and then you can do a dash, and this alone is enough to bait a reaction from your opponent, because your 5H is in range to threaten your opponent on wake up, and you're also in range to go for a crosscut. People don't like have to react to this move, so they would backdash, DP, jump, super, anything to get out the situation. Of course, I would never go for crosscut. I'm just looking to punish the player's bad habits. The only time I would enforce my pressure is when I know the opponent would just wake up and do nothing. You could land a 236S and go for a 6H or 5H to catch their backdash or wake up buttons, fishing for a counter hit and getting big damage. Or you can do nothing and bait out their wake up buttons, super, backdash, DPs, and punish. And 236S carries them a great distance to the corner, where Leo's is his strongest at. Overall, it's consistent, which I value the most, instead of making hard reads that puts you at risk. This is going to be the most important section. This section, I'm going to show you how to open up your opponent with Leo's normals. This consists of frame trapping, staggering, and baiting out other players' reversals and resources. Okay, first we got his 5P. It is -1 on block. Often I find players will try to mash after your 5P pokes. That's when you want to slightly delay 2P into 6P into crosscut. This is probably the easiest way to get back turn, or you could do 5P into 6K. Both strategies work well on players who are quick to press buttons on defense. 5K is -3 on block. If you do the following 5K into 6K, it has a 1 frame gap, allowing you to punish players who are mash and throw or 2P. So it's good for players who are just constantly trying to mash through your block strings. It's a good mind game because you can also stagger 5K into 6P, and if a player is mashing 2P, the 6P will beat it out. And lastly, you can stagger into a grab. It's a good strike throw mix up, ultimately forcing a reaction out of your opponent if they choose not to block. Now, Leo's greatest strength is his normals. It can reverse Gatling into each other, which I'm pretty sure everybody already know at this point, but I have to say for the sake of the explanation, I just want to bring awareness to the strength and weaknesses of Leo's normals, which may not be apparent to everybody. That way you can know what not to do and what is effective. So let's break down his normals, starting with 5S. Alright, so 5S Gatlings into 2H, but this do not consistently connect, so do not go for it. 5S also Gatlings into 6H. It has a huge gap there. This string is a gimmick I basically use to test the opponent's reaction speed, but against a good player, they're going to punish you for doing this, so I wouldn't go for this too often in a serious match. Lastly, we got 5S, 5H, which there is a little gap between 5S and 5H, but this is good and bad depending on what character you are fighting. Some characters who have DPs and meter to super, they can punish you through the gap, especially characters with easy reversals like Ram. She doesn't have to do an half circle input, which can make it easier to super through the gaps. The way you counter this is you use defensive stance. This can help diminish some of the weaknesses that 5S has. This will allow you to use 5S to bait out their resources. So if you see they have meter, you use 5S, then go into defensive stance to bait out their reversals. And you can also bait out the opponent's YRC if you think they're going to go for it. And if they don't, you still can use the follow-up attack from the defensive stance to keep your offense going while being safe. So next, let's break down 2S. It Gatlings into 2H, which is good. It has no gaps, and you can take full advantage of the follow-up mechanic of the game. So normals that have follow-up don't have a cancel window. It makes frame trapping way easier. Then you got 2S into 6H, just like 5S into 6H. There is a huge gap, easy to punish. And then you got 2S into 5H, which shares the same weaknesses as 5S into 5H, but unlike 5S, it doesn't have an option to go into defensive stance. But 2S is safe on block, so it is a good button to stagger if you think the opponent will throw out a reversal. And lastly, we got 5H. It Gatlings into 5S and 2S. Now, this is what makes Leo's normal so strong. Leo's 5H is not like other characters' 5H. Once they throw out their 5H, the only follow-up they have left is a special attack. But with Leo, he doesn't have to throw out a special attack. He could just follow up with another normal. So you can never tell when Leo's pressure stops. This allows Leo to take frame trapping and stagger pressure to another level. You could do so much mind games off of 5H. Like for instance, you could do 5H into 2S. You could stagger the 5H, and if you see the opponent move, you could throw out 2S. And this is especially good against characters who like to take their turn back with low profile attacks. This is extremely effective because 2S is one of Leo's disjointed hitboxes that they have. It snuffs out a lot of low advance attacks or just low attacks in general. And if they do nothing, you could stagger 5H into 5H, or you could throw out a 5H and see what the opponent does next. Most players like to try to jump out of Leo's pressure, and because you stagger 5H, this visually gives you enough time to react to them trying to attack back or jumping out of your block string to counter them. Like I said prior in the defensive stance section, 5H into defensive stance follow-up attack, it counters players who are trying to mash and take their turn back. And the follow attack is 0 on block. So this allows you to continue your stagger pressure. And lastly, you can just stagger any button into DP. So you can stagger to S and wait to see if they try to take their turn back and then go for a DP. So just to wrap everything up, Leo's normals on their own is not necessarily strong. An opponent could just block low and mid attacks all day. So I know at times it can seem stressful to open up your opponent because it's not like other characters where they have overheads or characters with good strike throw setups can open up an opponent. But because Leo's normals can infinitely chain into each other, they can't just sit there all day. The strength in Leo's normals come from being able to punish the opponent response and shutting it down. This allows a very free form of pressure where his normals have no cancel window. So you can be very creative in how you switch up the timing to throw off your opponent.
Let's rock. Counter. Burst. Counter. 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 Counter.
素晴らしい。